Warning. This product may cause increased altitudes, more airtime, more cross-country miles, jaw-dropping awesomeness, record-breaking flights, competition trophies, thoughts of world domination, and a large permanent grin. Use at your own risk.
This is the pre-flight briefing for Practical Exercise 3, Steady Circles 2. The purpose of this exercise is to practice flying a steady circle in turbulence and with your Vario making a lot of distracting noise. This exercise is just like the previous one, except for two things. First, you'll be circling in the edge of a thermal instead of in still air. You'll probably be climbing in part of your circle and descending in part of your circle. Don't worry about your altitude or vertical speed, though. You're just trying to prove that you can fly steady circles even in turbulence and even when everything in you screams that you should move your circle a little in one direction. This is partially a test of your ability to hold a steady airspeed and bank in turbulence, but it's also a test of your patience and restraint, things that will serve you well in thermaling and in cross-country flying. The other difference from the previous exercise is that you won't immediately reverse your turn direction when it's time to change turn directions. Instead, you'll fly straight away from the thermal for 15 seconds or so, and then make a 180-degree turn to return to the thermal and repeat the exercise turning the opposite direction. I recommend using one of two methods in Condor to gauge this 180-degree turn. The first one, and the one that I use the most, is to use the analog compass. Just turn through 6 labeled increments, each of which represents 30 degrees of heading change. My next most preferred method is to use the PDA. Just turn till the glider icon on the map page points in the opposite direction. This method isn't quite as precise as using the compass, but the main reason it isn't my preferred method is that if the PDA isn't already on the map page, you must switch to the map page before starting the turn. In this exercise, the PDA will always be on the map page, but in later exercises you'll use other PDA pages. Whichever method you use, start rolling out a little early to avoid overshooting your intended post-turn heading, which should be 180 degrees different from your pre-turn heading. In this exercise, you'll use what Condor calls thermal helpers to see the thermal, so that you can fly straight into it without wasting time trying to find it. This screenshot shows thermal helpers, and this is the thermal you'll use for this exercise. To make sure you're in the intended position relative to this thermal, you'll need to fly directly toward the center of the thermal and start your turn at just the right moment, when you're in the center of the thermal. When you first start flying, you'll turn a little to the left and head directly for this thermal as shown here. Notice that at this point you can see several red bubbles in this thermal. As you get closer, you'll see fewer and fewer bubbles on screen at once. Here you can see 3 complete bubbles and part of a 4th. When you can see only one bubble, as shown here, you'll fairly quickly roll to a thermaling bank angle. As in the previous exercise, try to keep your airspeed in the 83 to 93 kilometers per hour or 45 to 50 knots range while circling. This will be tougher because of the thermal, so don't worry if you briefly get as much as 9 kilometers per hour or 5 knots outside this range. Also, again try to keep your circling bank angle such that the angled side of the instrument panel's glare shield is parallel to the horizon. You should be able to manage a bank angle about as well as in the previous exercise, despite the turbulence of the thermal. Here's the flight track playback at about 6 times actual speed of a successful attempt of this exercise. To pass this exercise, you must make at least 9 consecutive circles in each direction, must keep your airspeed and circle durations within certain ranges while circling, and must fly consistent enough circles that each circle in a group overlaps every other circle in that group. By the way, the speed shown here in Condor's flight analysis window is ground speed, not airspeed. Assuming calm winds, unless you're at sea level altitude, your ground speed will always be higher than the airspeed shown on the Condor airspeed indicator in the cockpit. This explains what you may have noticed in the previous exercise, and will find in this exercise too, that the middle of the acceptable speed range, as shown in the flight analysis window, is 3 or 4 kilometers per hour, or 2 knots, faster than the middle of the airspeed range you're asked to hold while circling. It isn't important for this exercise, or maybe even ever, that you understand why ground speed is higher than the speed shown on the airspeed indicator, but if you're curious, do some research into the terms indicated airspeed and true airspeed. Don't worry much about this though. Learning all about the differences between indicated airspeed, true airspeed, and ground speed won't help your flying nearly as much as learning to fly steady circles. This concludes the pre-flight briefing for Practical Exercise 3, Steady Circles 2. Relax, have fun, and good luck.